Well, hello, I'm Linda, and I'm back again. This is the third and final part of the Amish Society and Culture series. So I would like to point out the photograph that's showing there. So you can see that to some extent, Amish kids, at least while they're in school, have some activities we consider normal life. They have fun things to do. They don't spend all day long outside of school mucking a horse stall or milking a cow. And let's start with individual Amish. How do they start? Well, I'm not going to get into anything rated R, so let's skip ahead to birth. All right. Most Amish traditionally have been born at home. And as obstetricians became more and more popular in the outside world, when most people were still being born at home, and they switched to the hospital, some of the Amish did that. But most of the Amish gradually switched to midwives. Now there's a difference, though, with Amish midwives. If you are pregnant and you're going to have a baby delivered at home with a midwife, or even at a birthing center with a midwife instead of an obstetrician, which saves money, and the birthing centers are set up to look like a room at home, so comfortable, low lighting, quiet, nice furniture, and room for the family to be gathered around, not necessarily during the actual birth, of course. Well, you would have a certified nurse midwife, someone who got an RN and then went back and got a master's in midwifery. The Amish train their own midwives, which in most states is illegal because they never went past 8th grade. But they are trained by a practicing Amish midwife, so they don't just go out and start on their own. They spend years assisting before they become a midwife themselves. Universally, women. No man would even think of it, and no Amish woman would hire one. So today, in most places, Amish babies are born at home with the help of an Amish midwife. And some states have reached agreements with the Amish that if the midwives only work with the Amish and don't take any outside clients at all, they won't be prosecuted. So there's some informal agreement to that extent. Now, when the baby is born, as you would expect, it gets named. The Amish consider certain names a handful outside of the Bible and otherwise Bible names to be suitable for children, whereas when they name an animal or a pet, which of course most of their livestock never get names because they are commodities and they're not something you get close to. So for example, most Americans will not name their son Felix, but a few do. But lots of Americans have cats named Felix. And of course, we've got things like Fifi and Bozo and Fido and so on. So if an Amish person heard you call your cat in and you named your cat Levi, they at least raise an eyebrow. Because Levi and Eli and Zerubbabel, Ebenezer, and especially John are names for boys. And Katie and Deborah and Ruth, Lydia, these are names for girls. Traditionally, so this shows the Amish do still change over time. Traditionally, every child had the same middle initial. And it wasn't actually an initial, it was a letter. Because an initial stands for the first letter of a name. And if there is no middle name, how could that be an initial? They continue to debate whether Harry S. Truman should have an S after the S since it didn't stand for anything. Well, with the Amish, traditionally, if you met somebody and his name was John J. Troyer, or her name was Katie A. Eiler, then you knew the first initial of their father's name. So every child, all 14 children in a family of Amos Mast, have the middle initial A. But there have been some changes, and you may remember this from the first lecture when I gave the names of children who died or were hospitalized during the massacre, the school shooting. They are starting to adopt middle names. So you will find children with names like Simone Ann or Rachel Leah, James Eli. They are rare, but they're increasing. And I would find it very likely that in the next generation or two, nearly all Amish children will have middle names. Before moving on to school, I would like to say one more thing. It includes school, but the Amish believe in corporal punishment because they follow the Bible, and the Bible, as a 3,000 or 4,000 year old document in some parts from the Bronze Age, taught that you should strike your children with big sticks if they were bad. Well, they don't use great big rods among the Amish. They'll paddle or spank, but they do practice that, and of course they have to be increasingly careful since we now realize that this causes permanent psychological damage and consider it child abuse. They have to be careful that outsiders don't see them and report them to Child Protection Services. I'm not even talking about what anybody would consider abuse here, because conservative Americans still spank their kids too. I'm just talking about spanking and paddling, period. Abuse we'll get to in a little bit. All right, here is a picture of an Amish schoolroom. The Amish teacher is apprenticed at age 16, but she may be a teacher's aide when she finishes school herself at 14. And once she is 18, at whatever point they have an opening, for example, if a teacher is getting married, then of course she can't teach anymore because she's expected to be at home. And so the apprentice or the former aide or whatever she might be at the time, if she is 18, can take over. You can see it's one room. Very rarely you will see two rooms, but this is standard, this is typical. They still have blackboards. Some of the newer schools now have whiteboards. None of them have computers, calculators, or video screens of any kind. In East Holmes School District in Holmes County, Ohio, the public schools never consolidated their rural elementary schools. So the Amish still go to public schools in East Holmes County because they're one-room schools taught by a public school teacher. And they avoid doing things that would upset the Amish because then they would leave, open up their own schools, and the school would have no students and shut down. And of course, a school district gets paid by the state for every seat filled by a child's posterior. So there we go. Let's edit that posterior out. because that probably wasn't something I should have said. All right, now, Amish schools, and again, the majority of them, the vast majority are now private Amish schools, or we could call them parochial schools, don't teach any science at all. If you consider geography a science, well, most people would consider it part of social studies, but if you do, they memorize the states and their capitals and a few other odds and ends like that. They may know where the Mississippi River is. They don't learn about other countries, with the possible exception of Canada, especially since they're Canadian Amish. They may be learning about Canada and ignoring the United States, but they don't really know about Europe. They know nothing about Asia and Africa, South America to speak of. Anything about that they pick up on their own, which, by the way, Amish schools don't have anything we would consider a library. They would have maybe a bookcase on one side of the room, not counting the regular school books all the children use. There's, needless to say, no sex ed at home either. One Amish woman said, I saw recently in a YouTube video, that when she was 17 and about to begin Rumspringa, the running around period, her mother came to her and said, you know that you cannot have sex until you are married. Yes. And her very embarrassed, blushing daughter said, yes. And that was the talk. In keeping with there being no science at all, and all lessons based on the Bible as much as possible, this conversation might not surprise you. It's a very short exchange. One Amish boy, who's now a professor at a university in Chicago, said that they'd had the bishop over at his family's home for dinner. And after the dinner, he went out to find the bishop standing out on the porch. And he went out and decided to make some small talk, kind of intimidating. Little boy, and there's the bishop. But he looked up at the Milky Way, and he said, looking at all those stars and galaxies, how small we are, just standing on this floating ball of space in the midst of all of that. And as he put it, the bishop turned to him and said with such venom, "Don't you know that the Bible teaches that the earth is flat?" And stormed off. So, this is a picture of Amish school books. Now, some Amish will buy conservative Mennonite school books by Rod and Staff, Christian Light, a few other conservative publishers, but most won't because those include drawings of people, and the Amish don't draw people, just as their dolls don't have faces because of the commandment against images. But they will have drawings on them of household items and barnyard animals and things like that. So they show pictures of things that are familiar Amish environments for the children. I might be able to tell some of the titles from here about Our Heritage, which would be as close as they get to a history book. New Friends, More New Friends, Busy Time, More Busy Time. Seeking True Values. And of course, this would all be based on things that they're used to in their daily lives and the Bible. There is something that the grown-ups read every week without fail. Besides the Martyr's Mirror that I mentioned before that they'll have at home in either English or German, and an English, German, or English-German Bible, every Amish home pretty much gets the Sugar Creek Budget, which is usually just called the Budget. It's published in Sugar Creek, Ohio, in a small office. From the outside, it looks like the office is much smaller than this room, and goes to all the Amish in North and Central and South America. It's all in English, except for a column in Pennsylvania Dutch to help people practice reading and writing it, since it's generally an oral language. But it has a rich history of literature, particularly from the old days when the Lutherans and the Reformed and the Catholics in Pennsylvania spoke Pennsylvania Dutch too, and would write stories and poems and so on. So the budget is comprised of two sections. The local section with all the local Sugar Creek news and advertisements and what's on sale at McDonald's, and you can get this for 20% off at the lumber mill and so on. And then inside that, sold at a separate price outside of the Sugar Creek area, the one that's mailed, is the national edition. And that section is composed of ads by and for the Amish, and all of the stories are written by Amish scribes. That's what you call them. As opposed to writing a letter to the editor, an Amishman or woman writes regularly for their local congregation their news for the week. And that's sent in and published with the name of the church at the top of as the district is, as a little headline, like Aylmer, Ontario. And they tell you who died this week, who was born, who got married, who's sick, who got injured in an accident with a neighbor's tractor, and who visited. We had the Amos Bylers from Newcastle, Pennsylvania this week come to our service and stayed after for the meal. So that's the Amish newspaper, and you can subscribe to it. You can also order from online individual copies if you don't want to subscribe, but you just want to sample. Continuing back with the theme of Amish schools, this is a picture, a famous newspaper photo of Amishmen walking up the steps of the United States Supreme Court for the case of Wisconsin versus Yoder, decided in 1972. The Amish had been running their own parochial schools in several states with their Amish teachers in violation of state laws that said that teachers had to be certified and college graduates, and that the schools themselves had to be approved and their curriculums reviewed and so on. Yep, this is one of those cases, one of the pictures that I wanted to include from the web that I couldn't get to load to PowerPoint. I forgot it wasn't there. But it's another famous newspaper photo showing Amish school kids from behind. You can see maybe one girl and then a bunch of boys in their black coats and their broad-brimmed hats running into a cornfield to escape the authorities, come to take them from their Amish school and bus them to a public school. There's also a famous political cartoon from around that time. Around 1965 is when things started coming to a head. It shows LBJ standing in the Oval Office looking out the window, and he has an advisor talking to him, and he says, "Vietnam, never mind that. What are we going to do about the Amish school kids in Iowa?" So they went to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court ruled that compulsory education laws requiring Amish to go to school past the age of 14 did not apply to the Amish because of their religious beliefs, and that the Amish could have their own schools as previously determined in Sisters of Mercy in 1925, when the state of Oregon, under KKK influence, tried to outlaw all private schools. And the Supreme Court said churches can have schools if they want. So those things together, with the main ruling argument being that parents have the right to determine the direction of their children's education, meant that the Amish were no longer being forced to board buses or run into the cornfield. Again, that was as of 1972, when it finally got as high as the Supreme Court. There was an exception. Pennsylvania had already been doing something that the Amish were fine with, so that continued in place. In the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, children were required, as in those other states, to attend school until age 16, 2 years after the Amish believe education should stop in school and switch to education that will prepare them for life as a housewife or a farmer. And so in Pennsylvania, students went for an hour or two a week to present their journals and discuss them, keeping a record of what they learned that week and what they did to become housewives or farmers, or otherwise work with their hands like carpentry, woodworking, and such. And they did that until they were 16, and that satisfied the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. Since this did not force the Amish kids to go to a public high school or ride a bus with the English kids, and it was useful education as opposed to that useless garbage they teach in high schools that'll never teach you, how to know what weather is good for planting your corn. They lived with that. When the Amish have left school, usually not right away at 14, but more around 16, 17, and 18, they begin Rumspringen. That comes from the German herum, around, and springen, to run, jump around. So Rumspringen means the running around period. Since they haven't been baptized yet and therefore aren't strictly required to follow all the church rules because they're not members, but are under the control of their parents still, who push them towards following the rules, there's an informal ritual for coming of age where they try out the outside world. And the idea is to present a false idea, an illusion of choice. In reality, it is real to the extent that 10 to 20% of Amish children do eventually leave from the more lenient groups. The stricter the group, the fewer people give it up. The Schwarzentrooper Amish I told you about last time, who are extremely conservative, won't even have gas refrigerators in their homes, only ice boxes, for example. They lose only about 5% of their kids. But it's really more of an illusion when you think of how 80 to 90 to 95% are choosing to go ahead and be baptized and become Amish. But this is the period in which they decide whether to become Amish by trying out blue jeans, makeup, smoking, drinking. They may, depending on their parents, they may get a license and a car and drive their parents around because the parents appreciate the convenience. Hey, if the kids have a car anyway, they might as well take us to town for groceries. But again, depending on their parents, the kid may get a license and buy a car and keep it in a garage in town and sneak away to use their car. And the parents either pretend they don't know or actually don't. And they may get outside jobs like McDonald's or Walmart or something like that. They'll go to the movies, watch TV shows, buy a tablet or a laptop, definitely a cell phone, because that's slowly becoming an acceptable Amish thing to have, although the ones that the Rumspringa kids have access to the internet and all the apps, and the ones that the Amish get are more like the flip phone. They may not still flip open, but they're the ones that aren't designed to be able to access moving pictures, because that would be carrying a TV with you. During the Rumspringa is when most Amish who decide to leave make their escape. It may be they tell their parents, I don't want to be Amish, I don't want to be baptized, and the parents kick them out. Or they go ahead, tell their parents try to persuade them to stay, but they still go ahead and don't become baptized, don't join the Amish, move into town or move away. Sometimes they leave a note and just disappear. Sometimes they disappear and mail a letter explaining, because they didn't want the big scene with 15 brothers and sisters and the parents possibly bringing in the grandparents from the Dottie house attached to the side, all come together and try and pray with them and convince them to stay and become Amish. I remember it's often during the Rumspringa that some Amish become truly religious, because most Amish aren't particularly religious. They go to church every other week, go to a different church in the off week, or to Sunday school if their church offers one, or visit their family in the off week. They pray the prayers out of their prayer book, they read the Bible, but they're not what anybody would ever call evangelical. Or definitely not charismatic. They don't get emotional, they don't throw their hands up in the air, they don't dance, they don't scream, they don't fall on the ground and wiggle. They're very sedate about it. And to some religious people, that looks like fake religion or dead religion. Others consider that to be a quiet dignity. So it depends entirely on your point of view, I suppose. But to the Amish that become really religious in their teens, their parents do have kind of a dead religion. And they will get together for things like Bible studies and Christian singing. And the singing will often be the Christian music played in megachurches and on the radio, rather than traditional Amish hymns. They may be traditional American hymns, but they're in English. But I can't forget this. There was an interview with somebody when one community was getting worried about the older children having these Bible studies. One Amish woman said, I just can't believe it's the Lord's will for young people to come together and study the Bible like that. For the 80, 90, 95% who decide to join, they go through baptism by means of pouring, typically around the age of 22, sometimes 24, sometimes as early as 18, but usually right around 22. And it's often because they picked out somebody and they want to get married. And you can only get married in the church. So you know it's time to join when you're thinking of getting married. And I mentioned in a previous lecture that when the Amish get married, they usually restrict it to a small wedding of just immediate family, the nuclear family and their cousins. So 400 to 600 people. Church discipline is very rigorous. If somebody does something bad and it comes out, or if they have the nerve to volunteer, they have to confess before the entire church. And then they are given a sentence. And the sentences may be customary or written down somewhere, or they may be improvised at the time, but they may follow a precedent. So for example, if you confess to going to a bar and getting drunk. You may be told that you have to sit in the back and not speak with anybody or otherwise participate in anything except to show up and look humble for 6 weeks, and then you're back in the fold. If it's something serious like adultery, you may be told there's so many months or a year that everyone will ignore you, and then you'll be accepted back into the fold. Worst is when there's no definite end to the punishment. When you've done something so bad, like watch TV, that you need to be removed from the church so you don't infect anyone else. That's excommunication and shunning, the Meidung, or in Pennsylvania Dutch, miting. You cannot eat at the same table as your family. You cannot take a thing from their hand or hand something to someone else because they won't take it from you. They won't speak to you. They'll basically have nothing to do with you. They completely ignore you. I mean, if you're sitting at a meal and everyone is being brought plates of food, they'll bring you your plate of food. But they won't greet you and they won't converse with you. And this is done for the length of time it takes for you to go ahead and confess to the church that you were wrong and ask forgiveness. And if you do this, then you will be forgiven, and it will be like it never happened. Of course, in the background, the Amish hobby of gossip never ends, but officially, it's been forgiven and forgotten. In fact, some people who've been excommunicated and shunned have eventually, later on, been ordained ministers, deacons, or bishops. Living without electricity. That is a big deal for the Amish. They have some items that operate off of batteries. For example, if they run a small business or a shop attached to their farm or their mill, then they may have to have a cash register. And that little electronic cash register requires at least batteries. For other things, like electric milking machines required to sell their milk as grade A to the local milk cooperative, they may run off of an inverter that runs from a gas or diesel powered motor. So you have a generator running off of petroleum that is connected to a device that converts that DC current to alternating, and then you plug your farm equipment that you need into it. Most Amish, in most places, have a kerosene refrigerator or liquid propane or natural gas. In Holmes County, Ohio, a lot of Amish have natural gas wells on their property, and as a royalty, in addition to cash from the gas company that administers the well, they run a pipe to the home where you have unlimited natural gas for your home as one of the benefits of letting the gas company access to mineral rights for the gas. So the little devices on the bottom there, some of them control the refrigerator and some are connected to what form of power operates it, whether it's LP or natural gas or kerosene. Amish will also have gas or liquid propane stoves. Some still have wood stoves, and they get their hot water, if they don't have a natural gas well, from a device hanging off the side of the stove that absorbs heat from the wood fire that you fill up with water, a reservoir that you can use for things like shaving. In Iowa, Maine, and a few other places, the Amish refuse to adopt refrigerators. They continue to use ice boxes because they say this preserves the community better. Since everyone in the community has to come out and help each other every winter to go out to the ponds and harvest the ice. Okay, they chop the ice with these huge saws and cut them into cubes, big cubes, and pick those up with enormous tongs, and I'm guessing they're hundreds of pounds each. I don't remember the density of water, but I know it's way heavy. And load these onto straw-covered wagons, which are then covered with straw. And these are distributed to all of the Amish households and farms in that community, where they're put into an ice house or in the basement of a barn or another place where it can be kept, where it's covered with straw and used slowly. Little bits are chopped off with an ice pick and brought into the house and put into an old-fashioned ice box to keep their food cold. And some of that ice lasts until the following August because of the way they insulate it to try and keep it from melting when they still need it. If they have natural gas, they may have a gas hot water heater. If they can find a variety that doesn't require electricity to assist in its function, or if they can get away with an inverter on that. This is a ceiling gas light. If a family doesn't have a natural gas well, they will use kerosene oil lanterns. But these, for families who do have a well, bring gas from a pipe along the ceiling down to the individual light, which is lit with a lighter or matches, and it makes a popping sound. And when they first turn it on, and also once it's actually lit up, it makes a loud hissing sound to let you know that the gas is escaping. And of course, this would be very bad in an earthquake area, but Ohio's not known for those. You may have heard of the Amish Mafia. They're popular on TV, on some streaming services and cable. These are Mennonites and Amish, usually during the Rumspringa, who enforce a little bit of extra church discipline on wayward members. For example, if someone's abusing a spouse, they may come along and show the abusing spouse, which 90% of the time they're only going to do this with, well, I should rephrase that. 90% of the time or more, it's the husband, and they wouldn't do anything to the wife and the other 10%. But in the case of the husband, they may show him what it feels like to be smacked around a little bit and suggest that maybe he doesn't want to do that to his wife anymore. And that's good because the church never reports abuse. If a spouse is being beaten up, if a wife is being raped, if children are being abused, and that includes in ways that I don't want to say on camera, then if they confess to the church that they did this and accept whatever punishment is given, when the punishment is over, however many weeks or months of being excommunicated, they're accepted back. And so, functionally speaking, they get away with it. So, all of the horrible things you hear about now in megachurches and traditional Protestant churches, and that were long told in Mormon and Catholic churches, still happen among the Amish. They're not perfect, they're human beings, and they still do all the bad things that other Christians and people of other religions do regardless of their religion. Incest, unwed pregnancies in a circumstance which is still considered an extreme shame, as opposed to the general population where it's now kind of accepted. And normally there's no court case filed, there's no charges, there's no trial. They just get away with it. That leads to one other thing in the bad aspects of the Amish. Women are expected to be housewives their whole lives. If the family has a little shop, or if a husband feels sure we could use some extra money, if she has the time and if she can get the other women in the house, the daughters and maybe one of the littler sons, to come along and help, then they can make jam and sell it in a store attached to the house, or honey, or quilts, what have you. Or more rarely if they're married, but especially if they're single, they may go work for Mennonites operating a so-called Amish restaurant. I've been to an Amish restaurant that was really Amish, but most of the ones that advertise Amish cooking, plain cooking, Pennsylvania Dutch, are Mennonites with Amish waitresses and sometimes cooks. But other than voting in church matters and singing when hymns are sung, they are not to talk in church. They are never to lead in church. They're not supposed to lead in general except over children or other women. And when they vote for government officials, which was rare but is slowly increasing, they're expected to vote the same as their husband, whoever he tells them to vote for, because I'm the head of the house and I say this is who we support. In the last election, the Amish were extremely supportive of Trump. And there were some arguments, some of them political, that they claimed to explain why they did this. But a few Amishmen were very upfront about it and said, can't have a woman in charge. Women, the Bible says women can't rule over men, so we certainly can't vote for Harris. And likewise, in 2016, didn't vote for Hillary Clinton. So if we look at it as a matter of freedom of religion, they have the right to live this way. But if you look at it from a perspective of feminism, then Amish women are being oppressed. And if you go to the very condescending attitude that used to be called false consciousness, then you claim that Amish women don't really have the free will to decide anyway because of the degree of their oppression. And so if they choose to be Amish, they're just deceived. So you have the argument from religious freedom, and then you have the argument from basic human rights outside of the right of religion, that Amish women are not free. But in practical terms, they do choose this, and they know how other women live, and they claim not to understand it. Some of them envy it, but say, this is my life, that's their lives. That's the English lifestyle. I'm Amish and I'm staying put. Any questions? Yes? Mm-hmm. Yes. Oh, that's true. All right. If someone leaves during Rumspringa, decides not to become baptized in Amish, and they're gone even a couple of years, and they decide to come back, can they? And yes. If someone who is raised Amish at any point is willing to come to the church and confess before the entire church that they were wrong, or, depending on the church, since they were never members in the first place, if they simply asked to be baptized, then they'd go through the short instruction period, and then be baptized and become a full member of the church. They would give up anything from the English world that they had with them at the time. They would switch to all Amish clothes, all Amish belongings. They wouldn't have a car, a license, a photo album, a cell phone that accesses the internet, and so forth. But they'd be allowed to switch back over. And they would probably make their parents very happy. Any more? Yes. Okay, very similar. Okay, very, very similar. Yeah, that may be something they brought with them from Switzerland. All right, if there are no more questions, we are done. This was Amish Society and Culture, 45 hours of university classes, scrunched down into 3 30 to 45-minute lectures. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.